My name is Mazel Johnson, a 29-year-old man living a simple life in Charlotte, North Carolina. Managing a hardware store wasn't my dream job, but it provided for my family, my wife, Sarah, and our 2 young children, Ethan and Emily. Our life wasn't glamorous, but it was peaceful and full of love. I often thought of myself as a fortunate man. That evening, I had attended a special service at Redemption Church. Pastor David Turner had preached about what he called the imminent return of Jesus. His words were etched in my mind: Jesus is at the door, but the church must be ready to endure suffering before he comes. Those words lingered with me as I left the service. If you believe in God and near-death experiences, subscribe to Life at NDE today. Discover inspiring messages from God through powerful near-death stories that bring hope and understanding. Hit subscribe now and join us in spreading the light of faith. After the sermon, I said goodbye to my fellow church members and started driving home. It was a typical muggy summer night in North Carolina, clear skies but an eerie stillness, as though the air itself held a secret. As usual, I began praying while driving, a habit I had maintained for years. Lord, protect my family, guide my steps, and use me as an instrument for your glory, I murmured, gripping the steering wheel. I had no idea that it would be the last prayer I'd say before my world turned upside down. The sound of sirens pierced the air, faint at first but growing louder and more urgent. In my rearview mirror, I saw the flashing blue and red lights of a police car in pursuit. Another car, the one being chased, was barreling toward me at an alarming speed. I had no time to react. The fleeing car lost control and crashed directly into the back of my vehicle. Everything unfolded in slow motion, as though I were trapped in a nightmare. My car spun wildly on the road, flipped over, and came to rest upside down. A deafening crash was the last thing I heard before darkness consumed me. When I opened my eyes again, I was no longer in my body. It's hard to explain, but I was hovering above the accident scene. I could see my body bloody, trapped in the mangled wreckage of my car. Police officers and paramedics were rushing toward me, their faces illuminated by the flashing emergency lights. Yet, I felt no pain, only an overwhelming emptiness and a coldness that seemed to seep into my very being. Suddenly, an invisible force pulled me away from the accident. It felt as though I was falling into a bottomless abyss. I tried to resist, but there was nothing to grab onto, nothing to anchor me. When I finally stopped, I found myself in an entirely different place, a realm shrouded in darkness and despair. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and a dense fog cloaked everything in sight. Shadowy figures loomed in the distance, their shapes indistinct, but their eyes, those eyes were like black holes, void of life, yet drawing out every ounce of strength from me. Where am I? I tried to shout, but no sound escaped my lips. Fear surged through me as I realized I wasn't alone. Something was watching me, an unseen presence that was overpowering and malevolent. I had never felt so small, so utterly powerless. And this was only the beginning of the unexplainable events that awaited me. The oppressive darkness around me seemed endless, but I could feel it closing in. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was a void, a chilling emptiness that gnawed at my very soul. The shadowy figures in the distance seemed to inch closer, though they never moved. Their eyeless gazes pinned me in place, their presence draining every shred of courage I had left. I tried to call out again, but my voice was swallowed by the abyss. Suddenly, the darkness began to shift, as if something immense and powerful was stirring. A faint light appeared in the distance, small and almost imperceptible at first. But as it grew brighter, the oppressive gloom began to recede, revealing a strange and otherworldly scene. The light was blinding, so radiant that I instinctively raised my hands to shield my eyes. When I managed to squint through the glare, I saw her, a woman clothed in the sun. Her figure was ethereal, her face radiant and impossible to look at directly. She stood tall, majestic, her feet resting on the moon. Upon her head was a crown of 12 stars, and her presence commanded both awe and dread. As I watched in stunned silence, I realized she was pregnant. Her cries of labor pierced the silence, filled with both pain and anticipation. Her agony felt alive, reverberating through the air and shaking the very ground beneath me. Before I could process what was happening, the ground erupted, and a colossal red dragon emerged. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. A monstrous being with 7 heads and 10 horns, each head crowned with a diadem. Its scales shimmered in the dim light, reflecting a malevolent brilliance. Its tail swept across the heavens, casting a third of the stars down to the earth like falling embers. The dragon's gaze was locked on the woman, its massive form coiled in readiness. It was waiting, poised to devour her child the moment it was born. The sight was so vivid, so horrifying, that I felt my spirit tremble. This was no mere vision. It was as though I had been transported into an apocalyptic reality where ancient forces battled for dominance. As the dragon moved closer, preparing to strike, a voice like thunder echoed through the void. Enough! The word resounded with such power that the entire scene froze. Even the dragon recoiled, its heads turning in different directions as if searching for the source of the command. A presence emerged behind me, and I turned slowly, trembling with a mixture of fear and awe. Standing there was a figure I could scarcely comprehend. He was dressed in a white robe that glowed with an otherworldly purity. A golden sash wrapped around his waist. His eyes burned like flames of fire, piercing into the depths of my soul. It was Jesus. Every part of my being bowed before him. His presence was overwhelming, a combination of unimaginable power and boundless love. I felt exposed yet embraced, as if he could see every dark corner of my heart and still offered forgiveness. "Mazel," he said, his voice like the roar of rushing waters. It was commanding yet tender, each word reverberating through the very fabric of my existence. "You have been brought here to witness what is coming. The time of probation is closing, and the world is on the brink of a great deception." I couldn't speak. My entire spirit trembled in his presence as he continued. "The vision you have seen is a warning," he said, gesturing toward the scene behind me. "The dragon is loose, and he will persecute my church as never before." His words cut through the darkness like blades of light. Each one struck deep, filling me with both dread and urgency. "The dragon you saw is Satan, the deceiver of the whole world," Jesus explained. "He is preparing his final attack on humanity. The woman clothed with the sun represents my church, which is about to face a time of pain like never before." As he spoke, the air around us began to shift. Images started to materialize, surrounding us as though we were inside a living vision. I saw wars erupting in every corner of the world, natural disasters of unimaginable scale, and a growing wave of persecution against believers. A chilling spirit of deception spread like wildfire, infiltrating homes, institutions, and even places of worship. I saw powerful leaders rise, their words dripping with charisma and empty promises. Crowds followed them blindly, worshiping something that wasn't God. "They will worship the beast," Jesus said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "And many of my people will be deceived." I couldn't hold back my question any longer. My voice, trembling but determined, broke through the silence. "But Lord," I asked, "what can I do? I am just an ordinary man." Jesus stepped closer, his eyes softening with compassion. He placed a hand on my shoulder. And in that moment, I felt a warmth and peace unlike anything I had ever known. It was as though his touch carried the weight of eternity and the reassurance of his love. "Mazel," he said. "You have been chosen to be a witness. Tell the world what you have seen and what I am telling you. Many will not listen, but some will. And those few will make the difference in the battle that is coming." He gestured toward the horizon, and I turned to see a radiant city floating in the sky. Its brilliance was almost unbearable, each detail shimmering with divine perfection. "This," he said, "is the New Jerusalem, the destiny of all who remain faithful to me." But as I gazed at the city, something dark began to rise in the landscape below. A massive crowd was marching toward a black throne, and seated upon it was a being that radiated pure evil. In its hands was a black book, and it pointed menacingly at the crowd. "These," Jesus said, his voice firm, "are those whose names are not written in the book of life. They follow the dragon, and their destiny is the lake of fire." The weight of his words crushed me, but I knew this was only the beginning. The visions he showed me were far from over, and the message he was entrusting to me would change my life and perhaps the world forever. As I stood before Jesus, the visions around me shifted, as if the very fabric of reality was bending to reveal deeper truths. The radiant city of New Jerusalem remained in the distance, its brilliance a stark contrast to the darkness below. The black throne, with its ominous figure holding a book of condemnation, loomed heavily in the foreground. The crowd marching toward it seemed endless, their faces devoid of hope, moving as if under a trance. Jesus' voice cut through the oppressive scene like a beacon of clarity. "The dragon has sown seeds of deception across the earth," he said, gesturing toward the crowd. "They walk this path because they have rejected the truth. They have chosen the wide road, the road that leads to destruction." As he spoke, I was drawn to another vision. Two paths appeared before me, one narrow, illuminated by a faint, distant light, and the other broad, shrouded in shadows yet crowded with countless people. The narrow path looked treacherous, winding through steep cliffs and jagged rocks. Few chose it, but those who did were surrounded by a soft glow, as if guided by an unseen force. The wide path, however, was filled with people moving in droves, their steps aimless, their eyes hollow. They seemed oblivious to the darkness that enveloped them, as though they were sleepwalking toward their doom. "This," Jesus said, pointing to the narrow path, "is the way of life. It is difficult, and few will find it, but it leads to eternal joy. The other path," he continued, now gesturing to the broad road, "is the way of destruction. Many follow it, but it leads only to death." I felt the weight of his words pressing down on me, a mix of sorrow and urgency flooding my heart. The images of the two paths faded, replaced by new visions, scenes of chaos and despair sweeping across the earth. I saw nations engulfed in war, their skies blackened by smoke. Natural disasters of unprecedented scale tore through cities, leaving devastation in their wake. Earthquakes split the ground, tsunamis swallowed entire coastlines, and storms raged with fury that seemed almost sentient. Amid the chaos, I saw people turning to leaders who promised peace and prosperity. These leaders were charismatic, their words like honey, but their actions betrayed their true intent. They manipulated the masses, leading them to worship something sinister. I watched in horror as they unveiled a figure, a beast with a terrifying presence. The people fell to their knees, pledging allegiance, their faces filled with adoration for this false savior. "They will worship the beast," Jesus said, his voice steady but sorrowful. And many of my people will be deceived. The vision shifted again. And I saw churches, places once filled with hope and worship, now empty or consumed by division. Some had become places of compromise, abandoning truth for the sake of acceptance. Others were targeted, their congregations scattered by persecution. The woman clothed with the sun represents my church. Jesus explained. She is about to face a time of pain and testing like never before. The dragon will turn his wrath against her, persecuting my children with a ferocity the world has not yet seen. I wanted to cry out, to beg for answers. How could this be stopped? Was there any hope? But before I could speak, Jesus turned to me, his gaze filled with both compassion and determination. Mazel, he said, you are not here by chance. You have been chosen to bear witness to these things, to warn the world of what is to come. I felt a lump in my throat, the enormity of his words sinking in. But Lord, I managed to whisper, I am just an ordinary man. What can I do? Jesus stepped closer, placing his hand on my shoulder. The touch was indescribable, a combination of overwhelming power and infinite love. In that moment, I felt as though I were both nothing and everything in his presence. You are more than you know, he said. It is not your strength that will carry this message, but mine. Tell the world what you have seen. Many will ignore you. Some will mock you. But there will be those who listen. And those few will make all the difference in the battle to come. He raised his other hand, and the radiant city of New Jerusalem appeared again in the distance. Its light was so brilliant that my spirit felt both drawn to it and overwhelmed by its splendor. This is the destiny of all who remain faithful to me, he said, his voice filled with hope. But the road is narrow, and the time is short. As I gazed at the city, I noticed shadows stirring in the landscape below. The dark throne and its malevolent figure reappeared. But now the crowd had grown larger, their march more determined. The being on the throne raised the black book in its hands, and I felt its presence reach out, as if to pull me into its orbit. These are those whose names are not written in the book of life, Jesus said. They have chosen to follow the dragon, and their destiny is the lake of fire. The weight of his words was almost unbearable. The visions of destruction, deception, and despair were overwhelming. But so too is the call to action. You have seen what is coming. Mazel, Jesus said, his voice firm but filled with compassion. Now you must warn them. Tell them to turn back, to repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand. The light around him intensified, and I felt a force pulling me away from the scene. The last thing I saw was his face, filled with an indescribable mix of sorrow and love. Go, Mazel, he said, and tell them. In an instant, the visions disappeared, and I was once again surrounded by the oppressive darkness. But this time, something was different. Though the shadows lingered, a faint light now glimmered in the distance, a reminder of the mission that had been entrusted to me. I felt myself being pulled back through the darkness, as though an unseen force was guiding me. The visions faded, leaving only the faint glow of the distant light. It wasn't enough to illuminate the shadows around me, but it was there a symbol of hope and purpose. My heart pounded as Jesus' final words echoed in my mind, Go, Mazel, and tell them. As the pull intensified, I thought I was being returned to my body. But I was wrong. Instead, I was taken to another place, a stark, barren landscape. The ground beneath my feet was cracked and dry, stretching endlessly in all directions. The air was heavy, filled with an oppressive silence that seemed to amplify my every thought. In the distance, I saw two paths once more, the narrow and the wide. The narrow path shimmered faintly, beckoning with its light, while the wide path was crowded, teeming with souls marching aimlessly. Their faces were blank, their steps robotic, as though they were being led by an unseen hand. Then, I heard the sound of weeping. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, filling the emptiness with a mournful melody. I turned toward the source and saw a figure kneeling beside the narrow path. It was a woman, her face hidden by her hands. She seemed desperate, as if caught between the pull of the two roads. I approached her cautiously. "Are you all right?" I asked, though I wasn't sure if she could hear me. She looked up, her face streaked with tears. "I don't know which way to go," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought I was on the right path, but now I'm not sure. The light is so far away, and the other path looks easier." Her words pierced my heart. I wanted to tell her to follow the light, to endure the challenges of the narrow path. But before I could speak, another figure appeared. This one was cloaked in shadow, its form shifting and indistinct. "You don't have to struggle," the figure said, its voice smooth and enticing. "The wide path will take you where you want to go. It's safe, comfortable. Why suffer needlessly?" The woman hesitated, her eyes darting between the light of the narrow path and the shadowed figure's outstretched hand. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. "No," I said, stepping between them. "Don't listen to it. The wide path leads to destruction. The light may be far, but it's real, it's the only way." The shadowed figure turned its gaze toward me, and I felt a wave of cold wash over me. Its form shifted again, growing larger, more menacing. "Who are you to interfere?" it hissed. "You're just as lost as she is." For a moment, I doubted myself. The figure's words struck at my insecurities, reminding me of my inadequacy, my fear. But then, I remembered the touch of Jesus' hand on my shoulder, the certainty in his voice when he said I had been chosen. "I am here to speak the truth," I said, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. "And the truth is that the wide path leads to death, while the narrow path leads to life." The shadowed figure recoiled, its form dissolving into the air. The woman looked at me, her tears replaced by a glimmer of hope. Without another word, she turned and stepped onto the narrow path, her gaze fixed on the distant light. As she disappeared into the glow, the landscape around me began to shift again. The cracked ground gave way to a vast plain, dotted with countless others standing at crossroads. Each person faced the same choice, the narrow path or the wide. Some chose the narrow path, their faces set with determination despite the challenges that lay ahead. Others followed the wide path, their expressions vacant as they were swept along by the crowd. I wanted to shout, to warn them all, but my voice seemed too small, too insignificant. How could one person make a difference in a world so vast, so lost? Then, I felt a presence behind me. Turning, I saw Jesus once more. His eyes burned with compassion, and his voice was gentle but firm. "You are not alone, Mazel," he said. "Many have been called to this mission, and though your voice may feel small, it will reach those it is meant to reach. Remember, it is not your strength but mine that will carry this message." I nodded, the weight of his words settling over me. The responsibility was immense, but I knew it was not mine to bear alone. Jesus had shown me the truth, and now it was my duty to share it, no matter the cost. As the vision began to fade, I heard his voice one last time. "The time is short. Warn them. Call them back to me." And then, like a thread being pulled taut, I felt myself yanked back through the darkness. The sensation was overwhelming, as though my soul was being stitched back into my body. My vision blurred, and the sounds of the world began to filter in beeping monitors. Hushed voices. The faint hum of hospital machinery. When I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital bed. Sarah was sitting beside me, her face streaked with tears. She gasped when she saw me awake and threw her arms around me. "Mazel. You're back," she sobbed, her voice trembling with relief. I didn't have the words to respond. The memories of what I had seen, what I had been shown, were etched into my soul. I knew that my life would never be the same again. As I lay there, still weak from the ordeal, one thought burned brighter than any other. I had been given a mission, and I would not rest until it was fulfilled. Lying in the hospital bed, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with the memories of everything I had seen. The visions weren't just dreams or hallucinations, they were imprinted on my soul, more vivid and real than anything I had ever known. The narrow path, the wide road, the radiant city, the black throne, the dragon, and the words of Jesus, they played over and over in my mind like a film on repeat. Sarah sat beside me, holding my hand tightly. Her eyes were puffy and red from crying, her face pale from worry. She hadn't left my side since I woke up. "Mazel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You were gone. The doctors said your heart stopped for 3 minutes. 3 minutes. And now you're here. Alive. It's a miracle." I turned my head slowly to look at her, my body still aching from the trauma of the accident. "It wasn't just a miracle," I murmured, my voice raspy. "It was a mission." Her brow furrowed in confusion. "A mission? What do you mean?" "I saw him," I said, my words deliberate and heavy with meaning. "I saw Jesus. He spoke to me. He showed me things. Sarah, things I can't unsee. He told me to warn people, to tell them what's coming." She stared at me, her expression a mixture of disbelief and concern. "Mazel, you've been through so much. Maybe it's the trauma. You should rest. We can talk about this later." But I couldn't wait. The urgency in Jesus' voice, the weight of the visions, it was too pressing. "There's no time, Sarah," I said, squeezing her hand. "The world needs to know. People need to understand what's happening, what's coming. We're running out of time." Once I was discharged from the hospital, I began sharing my story. It started small conversations with close friends and family. I told them about the narrow path and the wide road, the radiant city and the dragon, the warnings of Jesus and the choices that lay ahead. Some listened intently, their eyes wide with awe and fear. Others dismissed me, shaking their heads. "It's just a dream," one friend said. "You've been through a lot. It's natural to have strange experiences after something like that." But I knew it wasn't a dream. I could still feel the weight of Jesus' hand on my shoulder, the warmth of his presence, the fire in his eyes. The visions were as real as the ground beneath my feet, and I couldn't ignore them. Word of my story began to spread. Soon, local churches invited me to speak. At first, I was hesitant. I wasn't a preacher or a public speaker, I was just an ordinary man who had been given an extraordinary message. But I remembered Jesus' words, "You are more than you know. It is not your strength, but mine that will carry this message." With each church service, each gathering, I shared the truth of what I had seen. I spoke of the woman clothed with the sun and the dragon, of the deception spreading across the earth, of the narrow path leading to life and the wide road leading to destruction. Some people listened with rapt attention, their faces filled with a mixture of fear and hope. Others were skeptical, their expressions guarded. A few openly mocked me, calling me a fanatic or a fraud. Persecution came swiftly. At first, it was subtle snide comments, dismissive glances. But as my story reached more people, the opposition grew fiercer. I received angry emails and threatening phone calls. On social media, strangers accused me of fearmongering and spreading lies. One evening, after speaking at a small church, I was approached by a man in the parking lot. His face was twisted with anger, his fists clenched. "Stop spreading your nonsense," he spat, stepping closer to me. "You're just trying to scare people. You think you're some kind of prophet?" I stood my ground, though my heart pounded in my chest. "I'm not a prophet," I said calmly. "I'm just a man who was given a message, and I won't stop sharing it." He glared at me for a long moment before storming off, muttering curses under his breath. The hostility was draining. But it didn't deter me. For every person who rejected the message, there were others who embraced it. One woman approached me after a service, tears streaming down her face. "Your story changed my life," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been lost for so long, but now I feel like I've found my way back to God." Her words filled me with renewed purpose. It wasn't about convincing everyone, it was about reaching the few who were willing to listen, the few who would choose the narrow path. But the visions haunted me constantly. The images of wars, natural disasters, and widespread deception were no longer confined to the otherworldly realm, they were playing out in the real world. Every time I turned on the news, I saw echoes of what Jesus had shown me. Nations were on the brink of conflict. Natural disasters were wreaking havoc. And leaders were rising with promises that felt hollow and manipulative. The dragon's influence was everywhere, subtle but undeniable. One night, as I prepared for another talk, I found myself reflecting on the narrow path and the wide road. I thought of the woman I had seen in the vision, kneeling at the crossroads, torn between the two paths. How many others were like her, standing on the edge of a decision that would determine their eternal destiny? I knelt beside my bed and prayed. "Lord, I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. The world feels so dark, so overwhelming. But if you've called me, I will follow. Use me, guide me, and give me the words to reach those who need to hear your truth." As I prayed, a warmth enveloped me, and I felt a peace that surpassed all understanding. It was as if Jesus himself was reminding me that I wasn't alone, that he was walking this path with me. The journey has been far from easy. The opposition continues, and the weight of the mission can be overwhelming. But I hold on to the memory of the radiant city, the promise of the New Jerusalem, and the hope that the narrow path leads to life. I've seen the faces of those who have turned back to God because of the message I shared. I've felt the impact of the words Jesus gave me. And I know that even if only a few choose the narrow path, it will make a difference in the battle to come. The world stands at a critical crossroads, a place where every decision carries eternal weight. The dragon's deception is not subtle, it is pervasive, creeping into the hearts and minds of people across the globe, distorting truth into lies and twisting light into darkness. Its influence can be felt in every corner of society, from the whispers of doubt and personal faith to the loud, divisive cries in the public square. But even as the dragon's shadow spreads, so too does the light of truth, a beacon of hope piercing through the darkness, guiding those who are willing to see it. I can feel the urgency of the moment in every breath I take. It's as if the very air is charged with the weight of what's at stake, with the countless souls standing at the precipice of a decision they don't fully comprehend. I don't know how much time we have left before the events I witnessed unfold completely. Each second feels precious, a fleeting opportunity to reach someone, to turn them toward the narrow path before it's too late. Every moment matters. Not just for me, but for everyone who has been called to carry the light of truth. With every step I take, whether in strength or in weakness, I cling tightly to the mission Jesus entrusted to me. His words are etched into my soul. A constant reminder that I am not acting alone. That the battle is not mine to fight but His. The narrow path stretches before me. Challenging and steep. Lined with obstacles that test my resolve at every turn. Yet, it is also illuminated by the promise of what lies ahead, a radiant city of eternal life. A place where pain and sorrow are no more. The struggles along this path are real. The opposition. The ridicule. The doubt, it can be overwhelming at times. But each sacrifice, each moment of perseverance, is worth it. Because the destination is beyond anything this world can offer. The radiant city, the New Jerusalem, is not just a vision, it is the ultimate reality. The fulfillment of every promise Jesus made. If you believe in God and near-death experiences, subscribe to Life at NDE today. Discover inspiring messages from God through powerful near-death stories that bring hope and understanding. Hit subscribe now and join us in spreading the light of faith.